So, welcome to the talk on the chakras and the Hermetic Principles or Principles of the Universe. The I thought this would be an interesting topic because I was doing a lot of research and work around the Hermetic Principles, and just kind of it came together that this correlation between the fact that we have the seven chakras and then there are seven Hermetic principles. And as I was working with the principles, I just really started seeing the correlations between the two. So I thought this would be a great opportunity for something for discussion and to talk about as we move forward. So I think for the most part, we have a general understanding of the chakra system. So just in summary, we have this system of energetics that is interlaid over the body, and chakra is a term in Sanskrit that means wheel or disc. And so within the energetics of the body, there are these little energetic wheels or discs that represent different energies. So for the most part, there's a lot of information available, especially around the seven main chakras, the ones that run along the Kundalini line. And these are the ones that we're going to be specifically relating back to the seven Hermetic principles. But the chakra system is wide and diverse, and it goes through different levels or the different layers of self. So, for example, we have the Hara line chakras, which is connected in with the emotional body, and there's actually 13 of those. So, but that is a whole other talk. We're going to focus just on the main seven for now. So each of the chakras holds a different energy and alignment. So if you're in the group, you'll see there is a series of posts on each of the chakras, and you can go back and check that out. I also have a weekly blog post going out right now that goes a little bit deeper into each of the chakras. So you can find that on my website, daniellehughes.ca, under the blog. Right now, what's been released so far is the root chakra and the sacral chakra. And so each week will be one chakra to work through that energy if you're interested in taking it just a little bit deeper. So, but taking that back and relating back to Hermeticism, the Hermetic laws of the universe, or the principles of the universe, really help us to understand the energetics around us and how to utilize the energies of the universe to help us to create that step forward or to help aid us in our manifestation. So bringing forward the energies that we want to work with or want to be with. So the basis of Hermeticism is that the universe runs on natural laws. So for example, apples naturally fall, right? Following the law of gravity. Birds can fly. We live, we die. All of those natural cycles. And you can see that from the dawn of civilization, we as humans have really sought out understanding these laws of the universe and how to utilize them for our benefit. So going back to ancient Greece and the Stoics, or the, Plato, and all of those, creating that space for discussion, philosophy, and a better understanding of the world around us is something that has definitely grown with civilization because we've had the time to do it. And so today, a lot of these principles, rather than philosophical discussions or that sort of thing, we really see this a lot today. And one example would be in the self-help industry. There's so many books being put out that talk about how self-mastery, moving forward, manifestation. And all of these teachings essentially can be drawn back to the concepts in Hermeticism. And it's interesting because all of these teachings today are teachings that 2000 years ago would have actually been labeled as heresy. So what is Hermeticism? Hermeticism is a non-Christian lineage that dates back to about the 1st to 2nd century AD. And the surviving writings, or where we get the information of this from, is from a series of letters that were compiled and put together in one book, I guess, or one collection called the Corpus Hermetica. And so these are a series of letters that were written by the author is Hermes Trismegistus. And these letters are all letters between Hermes and a disciple explaining how the universe works. It's information that after the classical period was actually lost to Western culture. And the only reason it survived is because it survived in Byzantine libraries. So it wasn't until about the 15th century that it was rediscovered. And it was rediscovered and translated into Latin by the court of Cosimo de Medici. So that name might sound familiar. He is actually the grandfather of the patron of Leonardo da Vinci and other Renaissance artists. And so as these letters were translated and shared from the court, they actually acted as the catalyst for what we know now today as the Italian Renaissance. And they influenced the thought and the culture around that. You can also see it influencing the standards or concepts through Freemasonry. So what makes these letters or these concepts so influential? I think it has a lot to do with the fact that each of these is an idea or a pursuit beyond structured religion to finding gnosis, or the pursuit of empirical knowledge pertaining to spiritual mysteries. So it's a way of almost scientifically looking at the spiritual mysteries of life. And Gnostics, I guess with Gnosticism, one of the pieces that makes it the most heretical is that Gnostics did not believe in a gatekeeper to the spiritual or mystical experience. So what that means is they believed that we could have direct communication with the universe, with God, with the collective unconscious, without requiring that middle person. We didn't need that priest. We didn't need that person to act as the mediator between us and the universe, or us and God, or us and however you want to kind of think of that. So one author that I really, really enjoy reading, and he has some great thoughts and does talk a little bit about Hermes, is Manly P. Hall. And the book is The Secret Teachings of All Ages. It's a really, really great compilation of, I'd say, Gnostic inspired writing. So one of the interesting pieces with the author of these letters is that we don't know who he was. So this is not an individual that we can pinpoint in history. And depending on the lineage, some people believe him to be either an actual physical incarnation of the god Hermes or the god Thoth, or a combination of the Greek and Egyptian gods. Others believe that it might be, instead of an individual, it might actually be a collection of people who were uh, in that group of Platonistic or Gnostic thinkers. So it's interesting to note that all of these concepts, the concepts can be seen in the Emerald Tablet as well. So again, leading to that idea of the marriage between Egyptian mysticism and Greek mysticism. But either way, we have this collection of teachings that can provide us with some better understanding of the world around us and how we can utilize that energy to bring ourselves into a different space or to achieve self-mastery. So the first principle, the groundwork of all of the principles of the universe in Hermeticism, is the principle of mentalism. And this principle means that everything is in the mind, and that everything around us comes from a universal mind. So all of the phenomena of life, our experiences, matter, and energy that we come into contact with is all created from thoughts from a universal mind. And therefore, our thoughts influence our world. And it's through our thoughts that we can alter or utilize the other principles. So the mental plane is the main plane of existence. And from that mental plane, we can tap into and make changes to the other planes, whether it's the physical plane or spiritual plane, or going into the larger planes of existence that would be considered unseen. So from here, this is that root, that base of the whole concepts within the letters. And we can see that in alignment with our root chakra, because the root chakra is the center or the foundation of our being, our physical presence. It is from the root chakra that we have our basis of ourselves and our energy. When the root chakra is off, then it puts everything out of kilter. And when we forget that the universe is made up of our thoughts, then things can go askew with the outer world as well. So with this being the physical manifestation of other energies, so our root chakra is our physical manifestation of all of our other energies. The mental plane, or our mental thoughts, are the foundation of all of the other aspects of our life. And so that's where these two start to come together. Our second principle is the principle of correspondence. And the principle of correspondence is the one that teaches us, as within, so without, as above, so below. And so this teaches us, or this principle tells us, that there is a correspondence between laws and phenomena. So what happens here creates an energetic vibration that affects everything else. There's a ripple effect that happens. What is going on in our outer landscape can be a really clear indication of what's going on in our inner landscape. So, for example, it can be easier to concentrate or to feel more focused when our outer world is a little more organized. But think about a time when you tried to learn something new, or maybe study for an exam, and the room around you was a mess and chaotic. How much information were you able to absorb? Because your internal world was probably a little bit messy and chaotic and unfocused. Uh, when we look at the principle of correspondence, it helps us to find creative solutions. So understanding that within the planes of existence, each is influential of the other. If we can tap into and look at the outside world, we can see how, we'll just stick with the studying, for example, we can see how having an organized space on the outside world makes sense. And we can apply that idea of outer organization inward, allowing us to put away the things that need to be put away and only taking out that which we need in that moment, so that we can change our focus to something singular rather than being all over the place. And so with this understanding, we can tap that into the sacral chakra. So the sacral chakra is the energy of creativity. And it is also the energy center where we start to understand how to relate to others. So relating from our inner self to the outer world, interacting as ourselves in an outer space or an outer world. And it's also the space of being able to build boundaries. So boundaries in our relationship, boundaries in our lives. And so this principle of correspondence really ties into that sacral chakra, because if we're constantly giving, then we're not being able to give back to ourselves. So being able to create that boundary creates a balance between the inner and the outer world, so that we are giving and getting in correlation. It also, because the principle of correspondence is about looking at different planes and seeing how they operate and how they work, and then applying that within our inner world. It helps us to tap into that creative mind and to come up with creative solutions, which is another piece of that sacral chakra, that tapping into creativity. So we're tapping into creativity, we're tapping into seeing things at a different level. The third principle is the principle of vibration. And the principle of vibration tells us that everything is constantly in motion. Everything has a vibration. And our thoughts, so each thought we have has a vibration, and has a vibratory rate. And it might be so slow that you can't perceive it, or so fast that you can't perceive it. When we think about the itty bitty little atoms that make up the floor beneath us, they are moving so slowly that it creates a solid experience. But when we understand that there are different rates and vibrations within our thoughts, we can utilize that as a tool to almost, if you think about it in musical terms, almost fine tune that instrument, so that we can produce the result that we need for ourselves and within our environment based on the vibration. So as you increase your understanding of vibration, frequency, harmony, and the resonance, so then you would be able to take that and increase your power over yourself, and start looking at how you can influence your inner and outer worlds, so that you bring forward the desired result. And this principle for me really aligns with the solar plexus chakra. So the solar plexus is our center of personal power. It is that space where we can assert ourselves. It is the energy that allows us to be confident enough to take the creative solutions or creative responses from the sacral chakra and activate through them, actually use them and move forward with them. Then so the sacral chakra really is the chakra of that self-mastery, of understanding the vibrations and utilizing them as a tool or an instrument to affect the change that we would like to see in our lives. So, and when we tap into that, we know through the principle of correspondence, when we do that, when we change that thought or that mental, whether it's putting it out into the outer environment or applying it inward, then it will be seen in the opposite as well. So our fourth principle is the principle of polarity. And the principle of polarity tells us that everything is dual. Within everything, there are poles or pairs of opposites. Oh. We just have a late joiner. I'm just going to pause for a second and let her get in. Okay. Perfect. We'll just let her connect in with the audio here for a second. Sorry for the interruption, and thank you for your patience. Perfectly. All right. So hi, Kimberly. We are just kind of getting through some of the principles, but I'll have the recording back out to you so you can see the pieces that you missed. I am, just because we are recording, I'm going to go ahead and put you on mute here. Beautiful. All right. So to recap, we are on the fourth principle, or the fourth law of the universe. And the fourth principle is the principle of polarity. So everything is dual. Everything has poles and as a variation of degrees along that pole. So what this tells us is that opposites are the same, but just extremes of each other. And so we can see this in light and dark, love and hate, hard and soft, hot and cold. There's no clear point necessarily where one passes into the other because you have these varying degrees. So I think one of the really good examples is, especially with like heat and cold. So for us in Canada, you know, think about what you would consider cool in the autumn versus what is warm in the summer or in the spring. So we start wearing shorts and taking off jackets and wearing lighter sweaters when it's, 8 to 12 degrees out, because we feel like it's so much warmer. And it is in comparison to what we've been experiencing over the winter. But as we go through the summer and things warm up and we find these different peaks in temperature, when we come into the fall and it starts to get cooler, all of a sudden it's around that 8 to 12 degrees and we're wearing light jackets and heavier sweaters and finding we have that experience that it's cool out. Whereas if you looked at it from the other way, it was actually considered warm. So that's the idea with the polarity, that there are different degrees of everything, and depending on where you are, there's no clear cut, right here is definitely the center point. And as we understand this perception of the degrees and the variability in the degrees, then we can understand that, going back to that principle of mentalism, we can, through our thoughts, through that mental plane, adjust the degree of the polarity based on what it is that we need. So, or what best suits us in that moment. So this chakra this principle being the fourth principle, really aligns with that fourth chakra or the heart center. And the heart center is the center of our being. It's the centerpiece that connects the more physical or lower chakras and the more spiritual or higher chakras. So it's that kind of point that has a little bit of everything, and you really see the variations and degrees here. Now they are throughout each of the chakras because they manifest, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. So they all have these varying degrees. But the heart is a really great example of that, being kind of that center point along that energetic polarity. It's also the space here where we kind of hold on to our emotions. So, whether we love ourselves or we are ashamed of ourselves or have some sense of, maybe on the extreme, some sense of self-loathing. And so within that heart center, we have that varying polarity between that love and hate for ourselves and love and hate for the outside world. So this is a space where we can do a lot of forgiveness work. And when we talk about forgiveness work, it's really about using our minds to adjust the polarity so we can come into a space of an energy that best suits our needs. So it's not that we're going to allow these things to happen again. It's not that we're giving that other person permission to do those things that hurt us, but we're going to forgive ourselves for being in that situation and adjust that polarity so that we're not self-depreciating or being angry at ourselves. We can come back into that space of self-love. So from there, we move into the principle of rhythm. And so with the principle of rhythm, this really talks about how everything ebbs and flows. Everything has its tides, and everything rises and falls. So this is really tapping into that sense of cycles. So this is life, death, rebirth. It's the changing of the seasons. And by understanding these cycles, this ebb and flow that occurs around us through the through the universe, we can tap into that to help to support or take advantage of and polarize ourselves into an energy that is the most supportive, that helps to bring forward what is we need in that moment. So by understanding, and it all works together, right? So we understand that there's this polarity, and then within that polarity, we have this constant movement. So almost like a pendulum swing. So if you think about a time when you went into an event that you had a high emotional experience. So this could be, I think a great example would be after a really great yoga class, you have this amazing existential experience in your Shavasana. And then as soon as it's done, you run upstairs, you get changed, you run into the shower, get changed, get out the door, and you go straight to work. What you're doing is you're going from this existential area and then swinging rapid fire back into the physical realm. So that can create a sense of disillusionment or disappointment in ourselves because we weren't able to hold on to that high existential experience throughout the whole day. But if we go from this this experience that brings us to this existential high and provide space to relax, finding a space that we gently flow into a neutral spot and then come back into the physical world, we don't have that extreme pendulum swing anymore, but we've allowed ourselves to very gently move through so that we're not swinging back and forth. We're finding this nice gentle pattern so that we can stay with ourselves and do what needs to be done. So The other example that I was thinking of is when we're in like a really high stress situation. So you get into a situation where it's, high stress. The stress response is triggered, the adrenal glands fire, your body is full of adrenaline and cortisol, all of these things that are giving us that fight or flight response. And so we basically ramp ourselves right up. And then oftentimes what happens is we don't give ourselves a cushion or a space in between. And then we just have this utter crash, right? You all of a sudden you go from high energy, rapid fire thinking right up here, go, 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 to suddenly crashing. And all of a sudden all you want to do is sleep for 3 days. So again, if we can recognize, and sometimes it's situations come up, but we can recognize when those situations are coming up and provide ourselves a space of coming into neutral, then that swing will slow down the speed of that. We're not going to crash so hard. We're not going to need as much recovery time to come back up to neutral. So it is constantly in motion, but we can adjust that roller coaster so that we are in more of a neutral space. So with this one, it aligns in with the throat chakra. So our throat chakra is our space of communication, and it connects into our lungs. So on a physical level, we've got that physical manifestation of the ebb and flow as we breathe in and breathe out. On an energetic level, that space of communication is really important. We need to be able to modulate that, to know when to listen and know when to speak. We also need to know when to listen to ourselves and when to take that pause to listen to ourselves before speaking. So again, it goes into that ebb and flow, that connection with going in and going out, going in and going out. And this can come in extremes. I mean, I think we've all probably done it where we've spent an entire day of just blocking everything out. And maybe like if you've done a meditation retreat or something like that, that would be a good example of only communicating within. And then when you come out of that experience, maybe not listening to others because you feel like you have so much to say. And then you don't have that nice give and take that happens. And you also have to relearn how to listen outside. So finding that balance between inner listening and outer listening. This is also the center where we digest information. So knowing when it's time to pause and digest information and when it's time to share that information or share that wisdom. And that's how that kind of ties in for me anyways. Our next principle is the principle of cause and effect. So when we look at the sixth principle, it tells us that everything has its effect and every effect has its cause. So everything that happens within accordance to this. And so this one is an interesting one, and kind of as we talk about some different things, I find that this is the one I struggled with the most coming back to, right? Because we're talking about, classical age thinking, and there's been a lot of changes in thought, especially in the spiritual community, when you think about spiritual bypassing. So this principle needs to be used with a touch of caution and understanding that a series of events can happen, and that an effect that you feel can occur from a cause from somebody else. So it's not necessarily that you created the cause. It's that there was a cause from the outside that created an effect inside. I hope that makes sense. So it's not that, because this principle, I think, could be very easily kind of twisted up in a way to encourage some kind of victim shaming, and that's not the space that I think it comes from. It comes from understanding that, every action has an effect. So when we do something, we are affecting somebody else. And there are just some people out there who don't care how they affect other people. And so, but when we can utilize this, we can help to prevent some of those outer causations creating effects within us. So with an understanding of this principle, we can try to rise above our current plane of thought and try to become our own cause as much as possible, rather than just solely being an effect of others and situations that we find ourselves in. And those situations that we find ourselves in are often causes from other people. So this is about being our own first mover. So when we get into a situation where we don't feel right, or if we get into a situation that doesn't feel right, listening to that and taking that action and saying, this isn't right for me, and walking away. When you get that sense that maybe somebody isn't being fully honest with you, accepting that wisdom and maybe setting some different boundaries with that person, so we can start to mitigate some of these outside causes when we understand them, or when we listen to them and we can see this principle in action. And so this principle really comes into alignment with our third eye. And it makes sense. The third eye is about intuition, that inner knowing, as well as our ability for empathy. So when we're in touch with our third eye, we are more in tune with those intuitive nudges and in tune with the energetics around us. And we're filtering in that energetic energy and processing it, and then getting that intuitive response that says whether this is a good thing for me, or whether I need to leave or set more boundaries with that person. And if we can listen to that intuition or that higher wisdom, then we can tap into that principle of cause and effect and become our own cause, rather than just constantly reacting within situations that we knew, or we had that sense that weren't going to be fantastic for us. So for example, taking a job, even though it's going to make you miserable, just taking that first lifeline or taking that first opportunity because out of a sense of fear, or because you feel like you have to from outside pressure, rather than really looking at it and saying, no, there's something wrong about this, and following through and then being miserable. So then you're in this situation where you feel like you just have to deal with it, and you're constantly on that state of dealing with or meeting the effects of that cause. So this really helps us to tap into that space of really becoming the author of our own lives. Our last principle is, so the seventh principle, coming in alignment with the seventh chakra, which is the crown chakra, is the principle of gender. And so the principle of gender says that gender manifests in all planes. And we're talking about gender, we're talking about the kind of the higher energetics here. So divine masculine, divine feminine. and that kind of higher archetypal energy, and understanding that we have both sets of energy within us. So this isn't about our physical sex or our identifying gender. This is about those higher principles of the dualistic nature, and understanding those along their polarity so that we can best utilize them and create a sense of balance for ourselves. So masculine energy, just in kind of summary, that energy is that assertive, progressive, exploratory energy. It's that sense of adventure, of putting yourself forward, taking risks. It's all of that sort of energy. When we talk about the divine feminine energy, we have this beautiful receptive energy. It's kind of a sacredness or an ability to self-sacrifice if needed for the greater good. And that deep sense of nourishing, right? Nourishing ourselves, nourishing our children, nourishing our friends, our family. And so these two energies are on that polar opposite. One is very moving outward, whereas the other is very moving inward. And the true progress in the journey of self-mastery, in our spiritual or in our metaphysical journeys, is really seeking balance in all things. And when we can find a balance between these two polarities, that's where we can really come into a place of properly utilizing all of the principles and creating a full and long-lasting self-mastery. Knowing that finding the balance between the two doesn't mean we are balanced both in every moment, but knowing we have that rhythm, we have that pendulum swing. So we're going to flow up and down through that polarity, and that we can change where we are on that polarity using the principle of mentalism and using the principle of correspondence. So this associates with the crown chakra because our crown chakra is our connection to source, the universe, the collective unconscious, the universal mind. And right here, that's where we have that authentic connection into ourselves and into the universe. We plug into both, again, finding that polarity between inner self and outer self. And it is a cornerstone, the opposite of the root chakra in a way, that influences all of our actions. So where the root is kind of this base, this foundation, the crown is the space that is the end space. It's that upper limit. And you need to find that balance between the two to keep everything flowing, finding that ebb and flow through the energy. And the other thing is, because the universe is balanced and follows all of these principles, through connecting with our crown chakra, we will naturally attempt to meet that energy. So as we move through each of the chakras, and we can see, the correlation is, it's kind of a neat way to look at both sets of energy and how they work moving up. But just like the chakras are all, we talk about them separately so often. And that's part of the learning process, is getting to know each of the individual energies, because we need to understand and value the individual energies so that we can start to see how they work together and the interplay that happens. So all of the energies, whether we're talking about the chakras or the principles, yes, they have this separate and distinct energy in and of themselves. And so we can create this separate and distinct correlation. But at the end of the day, all of them are constantly working in tandem and in continuous motion within ourselves and within the outer world. So not to say that that's the only way. I mean, for example, the principle of correspondence, we can utilize that through each of the chakras. We use that when we do things like wear certain colors to align with that chakra energy. We use that when we use specific crystals because we're going into that interview of that thing we really, really want. And so we take a citrine to tap into that solar plexus or amp up that solar plexus energy. So that as within, so without aspect comes into play, that correlation happens. But we also mentally adjust our polarity because we've created an action or a ritual that changes our mind and says we are bringing forward more of this energy. So we move in that polarity. And so you can see how they all start to kind of interweave a little bit, hopefully. So as you work with these, understanding that these are just an understanding of the energetics, and it's how we bring forward tools and practices that work within the principles, within the energetics. That's where the real work happens. So that is just a summary of those energies and how they work together. I am going to go ahead and turn the recording off, but please feel free to stay if there's anything specific you wanted to address or discuss. If you're watching the recording, please feel free to reach out to me if there was anything in here that you wanted a little more information on. Thank you for joining me today.